Undercover boss sits down for breakfast, freezes when waitress says tips aren't enough for meals. A cup of coffee without the soul behind it is just hot water with a roasted scent. It was still dim outside when Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the New Dawn cafe chain, tugged his knit cap a little lower and stepped through the misted glass door of a suburban branch. He wore a worn khaki jacket, a simple scarf, and held a small notebook in his hand, looking like an ordinary customer planning out his morning. But the truth was different. Michael wasn't there for breakfast. He was there to find something that used to be crystal clear, but had recently grown distant. Did the system he built still carry the spirit of kindness that he had once poured into his very first coffee stand? This branch, according to internal reports, was stable, had no complaints, and consistent revenue numbers. But Michael no longer fully trusted numbers. He trusted the barista's eyes when starting a new shift, the rhythm of a staff member carrying a tray to a table, the quiet pause between rounds of guests, a moment where a decent system could either reveal itself or disappear completely. He picked a seat near the counter, ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream. The cup was placed down by a young woman, thin, smiling eyes, but her hands trembled slightly from the cold. Michael nodded in thanks, but his eyes never left the way she wiped down the counter, turned, and bowed slightly as she brewed. A cold morning, a warm cafe, and one man quietly listening to see whether New Dawn's hearth still burned with its original flame or had become a replica of itself. Some truths don't need to be shouted. A quiet word is enough to wake someone up. The black coffee in front of Michael was still steaming gently when he spoke to the waitress, the one who had just set it down. Her name was Anna. Hair hastily tied, uniform pressed, always wearing a smile, but her eyes occasionally drifted, as if searching for a way out through the misted window. He asked, gently, like an older guest making small talk with a younger staff member. "Looks like customers have been generous this morning. Got a decent amount of tips?" Anna smiled, not the kind that spreads warmth, but a faint, strained smile. Then she replied, almost just enough to slip past the sound of the coffee grinder behind her. "Actually, I haven't eaten since the day before yesterday. I'm trying to save for rent, so every morning I just drink water." Michael said nothing, but his hand holding the coffee cup paused midair. That quiet voice, not complaining, not asking for anything, echoed louder than any strategic meeting he'd ever attended. An employee, diligent, polite professional having to go hungry just to survive? In the very system he once vowed, no one who works enough should have to go without. Anna's words were like a crack small, but enough to fracture the whole wall of ideals he once built. And in that moment, Michael knew he couldn't just be the founder. He had to be the one who returned to hear more clearly the things that silence had once buried. Injustice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it simply changes the name on the receipt. Michael stayed. He didn't rush off after that first cup of coffee. He ordered a plate of toast not because he was hungry, but because he needed an excuse to stay longer. From the windowside table, he quietly watched Anna. She was the one who wiped the counter first thing in the shift. The one who smiled even though the outside wind cut to the bone. The one darting between the espresso machine and customer tables like she had an engine in her chest. She worked like a machine programmed with dedication, tireless, voiceless. But when Michael discreetly glanced at the POS screen each time a customer paid, he began to notice something strange. Oat 41, latte, 2.7 tip. Brian T. 09, 06, cappuccino, 3.00 tip. Brian T. O time 33, cold brew, 4.00 tip. Brian T. Even though it was Anna who delivered the coffee, Anna who smiled and bowed, the tip recipient displayed was always Brian T. Brian, the male employee stationed behind the POS, since the start of the shift hadn't served a single table, hadn't moved from his spot, just tapped a few keys and stood there, as though every transaction naturally defaulted to him. Midway through the shift, during a short break, Anna stepped to the back with a bottle of water. Michael stood up, pretending to stroll around the cafe, then gently asked, "Is the system working okay here?" She hesitated. Then, as if she had thought it through beforehand, she pulled out a small notebook from her apron, the pages worn at the edges, the spine held together with a strip of tape. "I don't have a personal ID to log into the POS. We work by assigned roles, but whenever there's a tip, the system automatically credits it to the account of whoever's operating the machine. So, I keep track myself, just to be sure." Michael opened the notebook. Each line was neatly handwritten in blue ink. 0745, Table 2, Mocha, 275, 820, Table 5, Flat White, $3.25. 910, Table 1, Hot tea, $1.5. System record, Brian T. The last page marked in red ink, total, 387.150.3 weeks. System name, not me. Anna didn't shed tears. She didn't complain. She just softly said, I know no one meant any harm. I just want to be counted as part of the work I actually do. Michael froze, not because of the number, but because of the thought. Someone had to handwrite their own existence just to stand against an invisible system that very much existed. A feeling surged within him, difficult to name. This wasn't a software glitch anymore, not just a procedural oversight. It was a gap sustained by silence from people too used to a system that favored those with access over those with contribution. And he, Michael Foster, if he didn't act from this moment forward, then the name New Dawn would no longer be worthy of the sunrise he once dreamed of. Under the soft light filtering through the misted glass, Michael sat back down, so silent he could hear the wind slipping through the doorframe. But inside his mind, silence was gone. Every word Anna had said now echoed like gentle taps on the faith he once placed in the system. He kept watching. And this time, he wasn't just watching Anna work. He was watching how Brian would glance over every time a tip transaction occurred. The way he quickly tapped a sequence of commands into the POS keyboard, then briefly smiled when his name appeared on the screen, as if it were a matter of course. Michael also noticed the reactions around him. There was an older female employee standing in the corner, occasionally glancing toward Anna, not with envy, but with silence, tinged with sympathy, as if she had lived through this before. As if this wasn't the first time, a cook behind the kitchen window when Michael caught his eye gave a small nod, said nothing, but it was enough for Michael to understand. Everyone here knew what was happening. They had simply learned to stay silent and move on. And when a customer left a $5 tip, turned to thank Anna with a gentle smile, and walked out, Michael looked at the screen and saw, buys at fifth tip, Brian T. He clenched his hand, not because of the money, but because the system, which he had built to empower quiet, hardworking people, was now being bent to serve those who knew how to exploit it. In that moment, a thought sparked in his mind. This couldn't be solved with just an apology. It needed action, and it had to be big enough for every other branch to understand. The name New Dawn was not just something stuck to a storefront. It was a promise to the people who began each new day with real sweat. Michael opened his phone, not to send a report, but to schedule a return visit next time with no disguise. And next time, the system would call the right name. A just system never lets real people rewrite their own names. 1 week later, 8:59 a.m. The glass door of New Dawn Cafe swung open. No more hoods, no more old coats. Michael Foster, dressed in a deep navy suit and pale gray tie, walked straight into the cafe. Every step carried the presence of a founder, no introductions, no name tag needed. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Brian stood behind the POS, his smile frozen. Anna, who had been wiping down the counter, paused slightly, then resumed her task as if nothing had happened. Michael didn't say a word. He pulled a small USB stick from his jacket pocket, plugged it straight into the back of the POS system. The screen changed, switching to internal video footage. Scene: Anna serving table 4. She gently bowed and handed over the cappuccino with both hands. The customer smiled, tapped their card, and walked away. On screen, 09, table 4, 450 tip, Brian. Next came an audio clip from the previous week's staff meeting. Only those with an approved ID can be credited with tips. The system doesn't allow exceptions. The voice came from the shift manager, cold and firm, like a verdict against anyone without access rights. Michael looked directly at the group of employees gathered. He nodded. 2 staff members from the corporate office appeared from the back door. As prearranged, Brian T. terminated immediately. Shift manager suspended and placed under full investigation of all shift records and transaction data for the past 60 days. The cafe's atmosphere grew thick. Anna stood still, but her hands trembled not from fear, but because finally, someone had said her name the right way. Michael took out another small device, a new POS update module. He plugged it in, tapped a few commands. The screen lit up with bold letters. Tip, system, active real name vertical bar, real-time vertical bar, public display. Michael turned back to face all the employees and the few customers quietly witnessing the moment. From today forward, anyone who does the work will have their name recorded. No more defaults, no more temporary status, no more serving with kindness, only to watch someone else's name take the credit. No one should go hungry just because the system calls the wrong name. A soft ting echoed the oven behind the counter, had finished baking the first batch of muffins. This time, it didn't smell of endurance, only of renewal and of a system rewritten under its rightful name, New Dawn. Under the morning light spilling through the windows, the cafe slowly began to breathe again. But not everyone could swallow back the lump in their throat. A young employee, Jamie, took a step back, gently touched the name tag on his chest, as if just realizing that from today, that name truly held meaning. At the end of the counter, an elderly, regular silver hair, wool shawl stood up and walked quietly toward Anna. She didn't say anything. She simply placed an old coin into Anna's palm and gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a silent way of saying, "I saw, and I know you deserve this." It was a moment that rippled like electricity through the cafe. No one clapped. No one cheered. But everyone's eyes, even those of customers who didn't know the full story, lifted toward the new POS screen, as if witnessing something finally being named correctly. Michael turned, ready to leave. But just before he stepped through the door, a boy about 10 years old, sitting with his mother in the corner, suddenly asked loudly, "Mom, is that the man who brought back justice?" The whole cafe stilled. Michael glanced back, smiled. He didn't respond, just gave a small nod to the boy and walked out, leaving behind a space now filled with light and, for the first time in weeks, with hope. Inside the cafe, a new message had been placed right beneath the POS screen. Not a marketing slogan, not a policy, but a handwritten promise, framed in glass. From today forward, every helping hand will be acknowledged. No one should ever have to rewrite their name to prove they did the right thing. And in the bottom right corner of the frame, a single signature in blue ink, M.F., not flowery, not a declaration, just a reminder, so that kindness will never again be overlooked. Justice isn't something that should arrive late. It must be there from the start, like yeast in every loaf that's kneaded the right way. 1 month later, the New Dawn branch that once silently erased the names of those who truly worked is now the first to pilot a new system for the entire chain. On the POS screen behind the counter, every receipt now clearly displays the real server's name. Tips are updated in real time. No more defaults, no more assumptions, no more people needing to handwrite their own existence. In the upstairs training room, Anna no longer stands next to the espresso machine. She sits beside a whiteboard, holding her old notebook, now bound in brown leather, its edge labeled with a small tag. Documentation, the right things that were once forgotten. In front of her is a group of new employees. They don't start by learning how to make their first cappuccino. They start by learning how to ensure what's right doesn't get erased from the system. Anna opens the notebook, reads out the old red ink line. Total, 387 dies, 50 buys, 3 weeks. System record, not me. Then she looks up. No blame, just recounts. If a system forces the real worker to write down their own existence, then something was wrong from the root. Another morning, the familiar table near the window where Michael once sat silently now holds a cup of black coffee already placed. Beneath the saucer, a carefully folded $20 bill and a handwritten note. "Thank you for standing by what's right, even when it meant going hungry." Anna found the note after that training session. She didn't cry. She simply folded the note, placed it in the middle of her notebook right on the page with the red ink entry as a period. One that closes an old chapter and quietly opens a new one. For those just beginning their journey, respect cannot be a reward granted only to those who are approved. It must be a foundational principle if a system is to survive without needing daily moral inspections. Because if the kind-hearted are the ones going hungry, then the fault isn't theirs. It lies with the system that chose to look away and called the wrong name. A new season begins. Spring wind drifts softly through the glass windows of New Dawn. The pots of basil on the porch begin to turn green again, and the scent of toasted bread rises into the breeze this time. Not just an aroma, but a sign that something is being made anew of the right way. On the bulletin board near the espresso counter, a new line has been added, handwritten in black marker. If you see something wrong, you have the right to speak up. Our system exists to listen to real people, real actions, and real integrity. Beneath it sits a suggestion box no longer locked. No staff ID required, no need for access permissions. Anyone from the newest trainee to the morning bread delivery driver can drop a note inside, and they'll know for certain. Someone will read it. In a later training session, Anna pulls a color photocopy of her old notebook from her jacket pocket, not to show it as proof, but as a teaching material. There are times when people tell you, wait your turn, it'll come. But if you're still waiting while making coffee every morning, while wiping down tables during peak hours, then maybe it's the system that should be waiting on you. The young trainees, some just 18, sit in silence, not out of fear, but because, for the first time, they're in a place that doesn't just talk about fairness, but one that has tasted injustice and chosen to rise to correct it. The next day, a small parcel arrives at New Dawn's headquarters. Inside, no reports, no formal complaints, just a worn silver teaspoon and a handwritten note. This is the spoon I used every day during those 3 weeks. Now I no longer need it to remind myself that I exist, because the system remembers my name now. Michael places that spoon in a glass display box at the main office reception, not to glorify it, but to serve as a reminder that sometimes the smallest objects are the start of the biggest changes. And above the glass box, a carefully engraved wooden plaque reads, "Kindness is not a policy. It is memory of those who were once forgotten." No one should have to handwrite their own existence in a system built by someone who knew what it meant to start with nothing but bare hands. And if you are somewhere in a system that hasn't called your name correctly, remember, silence is not your only option, because justice sometimes begins with nothing more than a folded piece of paper and a red ink line that refuses to disappear.